One of the best tips that I could give for many upper body movements is simply forget that you even have hands. I've talked before about removing the mental connection between your hands and your back on pulling movements like rows and pull downs, and instead focus on leading with the elbows. I've talked about initiating the lateral raise and dumbbell flies with the elbows rather than the hands. And even in the case of an extremely short range of motion exercise like a barbell or dumbbell shrug, this still applies. The only thing that the hands should be used for during a shrug is to hold the weights. Many guys will create a mental connection between their brains and their hands on a shrug. It's not something they do intentionally, it's just the fact that you are holding a heavy weight in your hands. But the problem is, this doesn't help you at all with that mind to muscle connection for your traps. This also can often lead to poor form. Usually, this is when we see guys in the gym doing shrugs with really heavy weights, but the traps are really not moving. And this is a great example of just because you're moving a weight doesn't mean that the target muscle is actually working. This doesn't just apply to shrugs, but any other movement as well. Try this right now. Stand up with no weights in your hands. Lock the elbow into a straight arm and shrug up as high as you can. Notice the range of motion and how well you could feel the contraction. With the heavier weight, it's also going to be even more difficult to raise the traps as high. Now, try it again, but this time, place a very small bend in the elbow. It shouldn't be noticeable, but you want to lock that elbow into a slightly bent position. Not completely straight like we had it previously, but think of it as a soft elbow in the lock position. Now, with those elbows pointed slightly out, shrug up as high as possible. You should notice that you can actually shrug a bit higher, but also notice how the traps actually pull slightly in at the top of the movement. This slight bend in the elbow, it generally creates a much better contraction. Not only that, but what it does is it mentally helps you forget about the hands. It helps you to initiate the movement with the elbows. This creates a better mind-muscle connection with the traps, but that's only one part of the movement. And if you get this part right, you're already performing the lift better than 99% of people in the gym. But now, at the bottom part of the movement, your goal is not to just let your hands hang down by your sides. Your goal is to stretch the traps as hard as you can. There's a heavy weight in your hands. It's pulling the traps down. You're going to be able to lower them further than they would normally sit. Use this to your advantage. At the bottom part of this movement, you should be going for a deep stretch for at least 1 to 2 seconds. And then your goal is to repeat each rep the exact same way. If you're one of those guys that feels the need to perform shrugs with 4 or 5 plates, you're probably not going to be able to perform them like this. The same technique can be used on dumbbells, barbells, or machines. And shrugs might actually be one of the exercises I would say doesn't necessarily matter where you perform it. All that really matters is the technique, how you perform this movement. If you're getting that full stretch and that full contraction, you're going to be pumping up those traps better than any other exercise you do. And while it's easy to think that you need a lot of weight on shrugs, you have to also understand that the traps are worked indirectly on many other compound lifts. And they're generally exposed to some really heavy loads on things like deadlifts, RDLs, even squats. And loading obviously is very important for muscle growth, but so is full range of motion. And despite what many people do when they perform shrugs, I personally wouldn't recommend to treat shrugs as a heavy loading movement. I would personally leave your heavy loading movements for your heavy hip hinge exercises, and then perform shrugs specifically for full range of motion. But also focus on using a moderate weight and focusing on that deep stretch and that deep contraction. And if those traps are a weak body part of yours, I highly recommend incorporating these techniques into your training and watch those traps blow up like never before. And if you're looking to build more muscle using proven old school bodybuilding methods, all my old school mass gain programs are down below. And as always, if you guys want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.